Welcome to the L's. The L's was my closest friend for about a year and a half, maybe next to my wife. When I was doing my dissertation, this was the data set that I used. So I became very familiar with it. It's basically a data set that was collected on a sample of high school students back in 2002. And then it followed them throughout the years, occasionally collecting more data points up until 2012 when it took the last data snapshot of these students in their mid-20s. So it's a great data set for taking a look at how people develop. This row 1 is how the variables are named in the actual data set. I've actually already gone through and put in some variable names here that make a little more sense than the original ones up here. The first thing I want to take a look at is whether there are missing data or not. The way that I tend to do this, if you click on the top of any column, it'll highlight that entire column, that variable. And then if you go down here to the bottom right, not quite to the Explorer. The Explorer would work too, actually. But this little one just gives you a summary. And I look at the minimum and maximum. So I know that 1s represent males and 2s represent females. In this, it's just telling the biological sex. And I notice here that the minimum is -8. So right away, that's a cue that I have some missing data that's represented by a negative number there. Now this variable, on the other hand, if I take a look here, I also have a -8, which would be missing data. And again, this is because I've looked at the codebook. You would need to look at whatever explains the variables in your data set, or if it's one that has been collected at your workplace, you might need to ask whoever was in charge of the data. But here's a case where I know that negatives actually are valid data points unless they're a negative integer. Like this -4, that's missing data. Anything with negative decimals, these are people that were just below the average. These are actually z-scores. This is basically what happens. They collect data on a family's income level and on the occupational prestige. It's what it's called. Like basically how highly a job is valued in society for the father and the mother. They also look at the education level of the father and mother, and they combine all of this into a single variable. And if it's above 0, so like this person right here, we say that they're over average socioeconomic status. Anything below 0 is below, and certainly the lower you get, the lower below the average it is. So this is how I can find the missing data, just by clicking on the column header, clicking down here, and looking at the min and the max. Take a look at this one here, the number of sports that the student played in high school. If I look at the min-max here, I still see that negative data for -9, so the missing data. But I also see a max of 99, which is certainly not possible. And if I would graph this here, again, explore is how you can take a look at several parts of the variable. It's got the summary stats up here, and it's also got the charts. Now I have 16,000 rows of data here, which is why it's slowing down a little bit for my poor little computer. And if I take a look at this histogram here, notice that most of the data points are right around here. Number of sports played. So obviously the negative numbers are all missing. It wouldn't make any sense to have negative number of sports played. But I also have this 99 that's getting coded. And what it turns out to be is this means the student didn't even have sports at their high school. So that's a little explanation of those. Okay, so let me get rid of this guy. Let's take a look at what we actually need to do here. So I've talked a little bit about missing data, but what I want you to do, I think you would want to explore it for a little bit first before you kind of understand that whatever the negative or whatever the missing data are represented in your data set. And then you can go to this sign right here, which is the insert comment sign. If you can't find that on yours, you can always go to insert and then go down to comment here. I don't care where you put this. As it turns out, I'll be able to find all your comments instantly just by clicking this button up here. And it'll show me wherever they are on the page. It'll light them up. So here I'm inserting a comment about missing data are represented by negative numbers except negative decimals, and also by 99 for and that pretty much sums up how the missing data are represented in my particular data set. I also ask you what the variables mean and what type they are, like interval, ratio, nominal, ordinal. In this case, I have lots of variables. Let me just give you an example of one. And if your data set has a lot of variables, again, each column here should represent a variable typically. Just choose 5 that jump out at you that might be ones that you're interested in here. Let me do by race. So I may say by race, and this one is going to be a nominal, or sometimes called categorical. Is the race of the student. And here I might give something like 7 is Hispanic, 6 is, and so on. If you have a lot of data values, again, I just want I want to see that you understand what these numbers are representing. So if anything feels too tedious or too much like busy work, it's probably not what I'm looking for here. I just want to know that you get a sense of each variable. So next comment then would be the data quality. This one you're probably again going to have to know something about the data set, or whether that's through Googling it or talking to someone who's familiar with the data set. In this particular case, again, I don't care where you insert this comment, but let's insert a, oops, that worked. Oh, that's the other thing. You do need to make sure you press comment to actually register the comment there. So this one, I would say that data was a nationally representative survey of high school sophomores in 2002. Some data might be less reliable because some variables are self-reported, but in general, this seems like high quality data, and it was. This data set cost hundreds of millions of dollars to produce, so it really is a pretty strong data set. You may not be dealing with, your data set may have more biases, more things that are a little bit questionable you might want to mention. I'm just realizing, looking back through the list, that I forgot to show you how to copy the data set to your place. What you really don't want to do if it's a big data set is just drag like this. This would take me forever because there's like 16,000 rows of data here. So what you can do is, well, one thing you can do if you're on a PC is you can just hold down Control and press A, and that will select all of the data at once. Then you would go to your spreadsheet. You would click on week 3, and you would do Control. Oops. Let me just grab a few since I have a big data set here. So notice to grab a few, I just selected the letters above there. And then I'm doing a Control V. Okay, this pastes it in then. By the way, you could also, if you right click or control click on a Mac, right click on a PC, you could also do a copy there, and then on your week 3 tab you could again right click or control click if you're on a Mac and just put a paste there. Okay, let me specifically analyze something like this, because this is one where the mean and standard deviation won't mean anything. So this is the category race. There's 7 different race categories: white, black, Alaskan Native, Asian or Pacific Islander, Hispanic. There are 2 or more races. And so what I want you to do when you analyze this variable is to, again, maybe click on this so you see the minimum and maximum. Now that minimum here is a missing data. The minimum actual data point that's like valid data would be a 1. So what I would say here on this one, insert my comment, minimum, or maybe I say what it is again, students race. Minimum is 1, max is 7, average, and I can get that by looking here, so 4.9. And standard deviation, so the standard deviation, pretty quick formula here, STDEV, and you can just click on column C. Oh, and one more thing. Unless you're using a sample to represent a population, you should put the P in here also, because we're assuming we have all the data that we want to analyze. So this gives us a standard deviation of 3.18. However, average and SD are completely meaningless here because this is a nominal variable. Essentially, it's just arbitrary which races are given which numbers, and you could switch those around and that would totally change your mean and standard deviation, but it wouldn't really change anything different about the data. So last thing to do is I want to insert. I ended up doing a histogram. Technically it should be a bar chart, but this gives a picture of how many there are in each race, and it also made me remember that number 7 is actually white, not Hispanic. You can clearly see that it's the dominant race here across the country. The final thing I want to do then is take a look at a specific student and insert a comment about that. I'm not going to type out this comment, but let's say I wanted to analyze row 5 here. So this student is a female, and she is white, a white female who has a little bit lower than average socioeconomic status. For whatever reason, she didn't say how far she wanted to go in school. This is missing data. She had a bit more than average in terms of her effort, persistence, despite adversity. Her writing ability was actually pretty decent, about 1 standard deviation above the mean, and so on. But I'm starting to get my picture of this female who A little bit rougher economic status, but doing really well writing, and that's kind of a story that I